Hello everyone, this is Miss Johnson, and today we are going to be learning about the scientific method so we can start developing our experiments for our next lesson. Let us go over the steps for the scientific method in order to properly create our experiments. First, we have to make an observation. Scientists are always seeking answers and constantly wondering about the world around them. Scientific minds are observing and making mental notes whenever possible. Sometimes we have to think outside the box to search for ideas. Now once we observed, we are going to ask questions. We can ask questions along the lines of, how does something work? Why does it work that way? Why is something the way it is? Some examples are, which material is best insulator or conductor? How do different foundations stand up to earthquakes? Once you have an intriguing scientific question, then take the time to research your topic by using the books and the internet. Since we have our questions, we can form a hypothesis and prediction. A hypothesis is a testable answer to your scientific question. The hypothesis must be testable and measurable. This means we can conduct an experiment and we can use data to measure whether the experiment was successful or unsuccessful. When we have developed a hypothesis, we can then predict what may happen if we conduct an experiment. Typically, predictions follow an if-then framework. Below is a chart to help guide you with an example of a question, hypothesis, and prediction. Pause the video to read through the chart. Now we have to test the hypothesis. We test the hypothesis by conducting an experiment. Gather your materials. What are you going to use for the experiment? List your materials and make sure you write down exact measurements and units, similarly to the picture on the right. Then you're going to create a procedure. What are you going to do in the experiment? Just like in a recipe, you have to write step-by-step instructions about your experiment. Be specific, since someone might want to repeat the experiment using your instructions. We have to design a carefully controlled experiment, which means the experiment must focus on one idea or a variable at a time. But Ms. Johnson, what is a variable? Variables are factors, traits, or conditions that differ in amount or types. In the next slide, we will go a little further with explanations to variables. The experiment also has to be reproducible, so it can be tested several times in case of any errors. What are variables? As stated in the previous slide, variables are factors, traits, or conditions that differ in amount or types. There are three types of variables: independent, dependent, and controlled. Independent variables are the variables that are changed by the scientist. In the model, the scientist changes how many mints are in the water. That is your independent variable. Your dependent variable are factors affected by the independent variables. So in this model, the mints change the temperature. That's your dependent. You can think independent and dependent variables as cause and effect. Your cause is your independent. Your effect is your dependent variable. There's also a controlled variable. These are the factors that are kept the same. Some of the controlled variables in the water and mint experiment would be the type of water, the amount of water in the glass, the certain type of mints being used, and the size of the glass. Once we have conducted our experiment, the next step is to analyze the data and draw a conclusion. Observe and note down the results of the experiment. Tell us what happened in the experiment. Results should be constant, so do the experiment a couple of times to make certain that you're receiving the same results. In order to represent our results and conclusion, we have to create a graph that shows the data of our experiment. Bar graphs, scatter plot, and line graphs best demonstrate your data. We'll take time to use Excel to produce the graphs once we are at that stage. We are all finished with our experiment. Now it's time to show it to our fellow scientists. Create a report and a summary presenting your findings. All of the steps and topics of the scientific method and experiment will be presented on a display board. This display board will present your findings in a visual and concrete way for the community to see what you experimented and created. We have just reviewed the scientific method. If you still have questions about the steps, or if you have specific concerns, please bring these questions and concerns to class and we shall address them. For tomorrow's lesson, write down at least 3 possible scientific questions that you may want to research. Please feel free to use the links in this slide to help you with your scientific questions. For this lesson and unit, you will be presenting models to develop data through experimentation and testing. You will analyze your results and data to generate a conclusion about your hypothesis, prediction, and experiment. Here are the resources that I have used and may help you along the way for this unit. Please feel free to use them whenever possible. Think about what interests you and see if you can test it out as an experiment. I can't wait to see what scientific questions you bring to class. Have a good day and see you tomorrow.